I recently read an article. It had a statement like this. I've heard this many times before, but if God of the Bible is who he says he is, he has blood on his hands. And then there's this statement, why worship such a God if such a God exists at all? And another statement, I don't want that kind of God. I want a religion of love. I'm always flummoxed by statements and questions like this. My first thought is that person must have really gone through something terribly traumatic, and their prayers weren't answered, their thoughts and prayers weren't answered. So the question, where was God, becomes personal and relevant and so important to their lives. Where was God when this happened? It looks clear that if disease and disaster and death have such a free reign in our lives, that God must be evil. Or maybe God hates humans. Or maybe he gave up on us a long time ago and doesn't care. Or maybe there just isn't any God. If such a God of love exists, he would do something, wouldn't he? What's the use of a God who doesn't do anything? You might as well hedge your bets and worship a river god or some winged fairy creature who promises love and maybe can pull off a miracle or two. And of course, that kind of thinking, what is the use of God, is a very utilitarian way of thinking of God. It seems to me to be really tiny, a tiny way of thinking of God. But can humans think of any other reason to believe in God? I mean, what's the use of believing in a God who doesn't keep us safe? Or help me win the lottery? Oh, I can't attempt to answer all those disquieting questions. They've been debated for centuries. But what if the force or the person who does all that evil isn't God? What if there is something else or someone else who hates humans? Well, I'm going to explore one instance in which the disciples asked these questions, and they're going to feel real familiar. And Jesus will demonstrate his answer. You know, in this unit of verses and stories, Mark gives us three illustrations, three demonstrations actually, that show us the answers that Jesus gives us. It's going to be hard for us to accept these answers because the Western worldview believes that the only thing that's real is what I can sense with my five senses. It seems a bit like hubris to me. Who knows what else is out there? By Western, I didn't mean cowboys. Okay, just to make that clear. The only thing that exists that's real is what we can experience with our five senses. Anything else is mental illness, or fantasy, or superstition. We in the West have been very influenced by all these assumptions, but there are other cultures with other worldviews. So to understand this story, we need to enter a different worldview. A worldview that knows the world is inhabited by spiritual beings we can't discern at all. We can't measure them. Physical beings that we can't control. But they can create chaos in our lives. That's this worldview. So with that in mind, let's read the story. I'm not going to have any pictures to show this time because, well, it all happens at night. It's kind of hard to shoot pictures at night, right? There are two ways to understand this story. Keep these in mind. The first is the author's intention for including the story. The second is why the early church identified with the men in the boat. Also, let me describe what's going on here. Previously, Mark has shown us that Jesus told a number of parables. I call it the Sermon on the Sea because, well, he was teaching from a boat. As the crowd, they were standing on the beach, maybe thousands of them. So, now, Jesus has finished teaching for the evening and he wants some rest, so he asks the disciples to take off in the evening and go to the other side of the lake. He had quite a few disciples at the time, so they all came with him in different boats. So there was a flotilla going across the lake, the Sea of Galilee. Now, these people knew this lake very well. They were fishermen, and they were used to this lake. From what it sounds like they were used to fishing at night. So this was not unusual for them to cross when night was falling. Now, Jesus was as human as you and I, and after teaching and healing miracles all day long, he was exhausted and fell asleep on a cushion in the back of the boat. And then the men were sailing off into deep water. Now, normally it would only take a couple of hours to cross the Sea of Galilee, but that night, as sometimes happened on this lake, huge gales of wind came up suddenly, howled onto this dark lake in the dead of night, created such big waves that they were spilling into the boat. And it was filling with water. But Jesus didn't wake up. He's still asleep. He's all wet. With all that rocking of the boat and the yelling of the men and all the chaos, Jesus is sleeping peacefully like a baby in its crib. So they all hollered at him, "Wake up, Jesus, don't you care that we're all drowning?" Doesn't that sound familiar? Don't you care? Oh, I don't know what they expected him to do. What? Join with them in bailing water out of the ship or out of the boat? But what he did do was way beyond what they could have even imagined. And this is Mark's first demonstration of who Jesus really is. Because of what Jesus said, I think he was mad. Wouldn't you be? Woke up in the middle of the night by hollering and all this going on. Wouldn't you be mad? But who was he mad at? He wasn't mad at the disciples. No, he was mad at the wind and the waves. Now, if you and I were mad at the wind and the waves and we shouted angrily to heaven, it would be kind of pointless, wouldn't it? But not Jesus. Okay, now, we need to enter the worldview of these people. They weren't sailors like the Phoenicians, who sailed the Mediterranean. To the Jews, the sea and the lake were symbols of chaos and evil that hated humans. Now, here the translators of the Bible get real polite. They translate this, what Jesus said to the wind and the waves. They translate it, peace, be still. That's not what Jesus said. No, he spoke Aramaic. The Aramaic word is be muzzled. Well, we would say, shut up! And what happened? Well, the wind died down. And when that wind stops, the water keeps moving around for a while. But this time, the water became as still as a black piece of glass. Instantly. Ooh. Now, remember, several of these disciples were cousins of Jesus. They thought they knew him. And so, the next question they ask, and Mark wants us to hear this question and think carefully about it. They ask, who is this? We thought we knew him. Well, his disciples had seen him teach people and heal people and cast out demons and maybe even raise people from the dead. But this, they couldn't even have imagined. This is a message to fishermen, for sure. Now, they have heard in the synagogues that only God can control the seas and the forces of nature. Only God could have stopped this fierce wind and these big waves. So what does Jesus' authority over the winds and waves imply? They asked each other, who is this then that can control and command the wind and the waves, and they're forced to obey him? Who is this? You see, they still don't know who he is. And Mark does want us to know that they're beginning to suspect who he is, because they're filled with fear again. But this is a different kind of fear. This is awe. They are in the presence of something or someone they thought they knew, but who is this? They don't know the answer to that question yet. So, there's those two big questions that the disciples ask. Does God care about us at all? And who is Jesus? How you answer those two questions will make a big difference in your life. I've read many healing ministries, and Those ministers say that not everybody is healed. They don't know why. Some of the ministers themselves have fatal diseases. It's the way it is with humans. All living things suffer, die, grow old, and then die. I had the wrong order, didn't I? As Hebrews says, it was appropriate for Jesus to suffer and die because he was a human, and that's what humans do. So Jesus could be a great high priest for us because he understands what humans go through. Well, after all, in this story, Jesus was so tired that he slept in the back of the boat even though all that was going on. Does Jesus care? Well, I know he cares. I put a link in the comments about a song, Does Jesus Care? That I love this song. Everybody sings it too slow for me, but the content is there. Yes, God does love us. But there are so many variables and ways of healing, and God uses them all. I've read thousands of miracles of healing, but there are other options, and Jesus seems to prefer the normal creation that he's made, and he gives skill and knowledge to doctors to heal us and nurses to care for us. There's this mysterious life force that's a miracle in itself that we don't know what it is. Yes, but everyone has to die sometime. Entropy is real. Things fall apart. Things decay. The universe itself is going to stop someday. It's a tragedy for humans each time. But gloriously, it's the only way to get to heaven and be with Jesus. It's just that gateway I'm not so crazy about, the suffering part, you know. But the great news is that suffering will end. Jesus says, peace. Be still now. Trust me. Paradoxically, he asks us to relax within the terrible thing that's happening. Relax in the knowledge that Jesus really does have everything under control and even can transform this terrible thing into something unexpectedly good. After all, in the first chapter of Genesis, Jesus brought order out of chaos. That's the first message of the Bible. He still does that. Well, and that's why the churches came to identify with the men in the boat. Jesus turns terrible things into good. For example, the first humans, sin caused death to enter creation. And what did Jesus do with that? He turned death into a way for the earth to be renewed. Everything turns to soil and fertilizes new growth, and the earth is renewed. That's what he did with death. So the first demonstration is Jesus' answer to these questions, and it's a nature miracle. The truth of the story carries huge encouragement for us. Jesus cares, and he's with us. He's not out of control. He asks us to have faith that he will remain with us, that all will be well, even as the waves sweep over our lives. And someday that horrible thing that happened will be something that happened a long time ago and become just an interesting story. We have a picture hanging in our house. It's my grandma's sister. She died in the 1918 pandemic, and they must have spent a fortune on this Victorian frame that they put her portrait in. It was such a tragedy. But now, they're all together with Jesus, reunited. And all those disciples, those fishermen on the waves in the Sea of Galilee, that too, it happened a long time ago. And all those people have been with Jesus for over 2,000 years now. And we're just now reading it. And it's more than an interesting story, isn't it? As Jesus experienced, and he tells his disciples in John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. And John 14:1, he tells them, don't let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And in John 14:27, he says, peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I'm not giving you a false promise as the world gives. So don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let them be afraid. A psychologist would say it just causes more trouble. Jesus says, I am with you always to the very end of your world and beyond. The fierce winds will be gone. The evil waves will reflect the starry sky like a dark mirror at night. And we will be with him. And there will be a new creation. And that's the message of the Bible. As Julian of Norwich said, all will be well. And all manner of things will be well. And she said that when half her town had died of the Black Death. She understood. All will be well, and all manner of things will be well. Take a deep breath.